Welcome once again to the Kitchen Counter Conversations. This time we are going to return to our review of the tools you have to make sure that you're offering a reimbursable meal. Now, we started back in November with the production records, and we moved through the documentation needed, including your recipes and the child nutrition labels and product formulation statements. Today, we're going to talk about the menu documentation for your grain components. Now, there's going to be some products that you're probably going to recognize by the packages. And again, we don't endorse any of these products, but we also don't want to dissuade you from using those products. At this time, and with careful planning, you can use any grain, creditable grain, in your menu, just as long as you have the documentation for it. Now, grains are probably your students' favorite thing on the menu, and if they're not the top thing, they're close second behind your entrees. Many North Dakota kitchens make fresh hamburger rolls, breadsticks, and muffins daily that fill the school with the smells of that warm baking sugar. I just love to walk into a school with the smell of fresh baked cinnamon rolls wafting through the hallways. And I know your youngest students probably like cereal and toast as their favorite breakfast food. Where the breakfast pizza or a hot breakfast sandwich on a biscuit seem to be the preference of your older students. So there's a lot of grains out there that you can use. And a grain is required at both breakfast and lunch, and one of the options for your afternoon snack program. School meals are sometimes criticized for the amount of grain that they're offering on the menu. But grains are important for a healthy diet. They provide a lot of carbohydrates, and that's our most important source for energy. Grains also have proteins, and they're usually low in fat, but they do have some fat. Now you can see from this list that I pulled from USDA's Food Data Central for whole wheat flour that they also include a whole lot of vitamins and minerals and fiber. These are all really important nutrient sources for the human body. I'm bringing this up because we do have food allergies, and we're not going to cover that in this session, but you can see how important it is for you to have a signed medical statement from a doctor prescribing grain substitutions for any student with a food allergy. Now, each school meal program has its own quantity requirement for grain, with the meal pattern for your national school lunch program being that most complex one. In our regular school lunch, students in grade kindergarten through 8 must be offered at least 1 ounce of grain each day, but they need to make 8 ounces by the end of the week. So if you're only offering 1 ounce every day, you're not going to make that weekly minimum of 8 ounces. Where your high schoolers in grades 9 through 12 must be offered at least 2 ounces every day, and you're going to make that 10 ounces by the end of the week if you offer 2 ounces. School breakfast is almost as complex as the lunch pattern. All of the grades need 1 ounce daily, but you can see that our kindergarten through 5th grade need to have 7 ounces by the end of the week. Grades 6 through 8 need 8 ounces, and grades 9 through 12 need to get 9 ounces by the end of the week. Most of our schools do use the flexibility where you can take your oldest grade group that you're serving and just use that meal pattern for all the students during breakfast. There are no minimums for or weekly requirements for the summer and emergency summer food service program that you're in right now. So you just need to remember to offer at least 1 serving of grain at each meal every day. Then for the after-school snack program, there's 1 ounce of grain may be offered as one of the 2 components of your snack. A copy of the meal pattern for each of the programs is included in your individual program production books. Now, I was watching a CACFP webinar last week, I think it was, and they had a tip on there to take your meal pattern, make a copy of it, and laminate it so that you can have it sitting right out on your kitchen counter so you can use it as a nice reference every day. Let's talk about creditable versus non-creditable grains next. And this is something that I was learning right along with you in doing this presentation. There are creditable grains and non-creditable grains. Creditable are the ones that can be counted for a reimbursable meal. Grains are found in the cereal plant family only for our school food service. And that means the wheat, the oats, corn, our rice. Some of the less familiar ones are barley, rye, and quinoa. To be creditable, the grain must be whole grain or enriched or fortified. Now our baked goods must have 16 grams of creditable grain per ounce, and our fractions must be rounded down to the nearest 1/4 ounce. I'm also going to put the note here for our grains on your desserts and sweet grains, and most of you know that in a regular school lunch program, the menu can include up to 2 ounces of our desserts or sweet grains counted in the meal plan. But you can never serve a dessert or a sweet grain to your pre-K or your CACFP programs, and those might be Head Start students. Now, the non-creditable grains include things that are not whole grain or enriched or fortified. Some are added to bump up a product's fiber content, such as the oat fiber and the corn fiber. Ingredients listed as starch are also not creditable, and these include the wheat starch, corn starch. Modified food starch can be from potatoes and legumes, and then tapioca. Also not creditable are bran or germ as individual components. Nut and seed flours are not creditable, and many of our gluten-free products are made with almond or cashew flour or a variety of other flours to help individuals enjoy the conveniences of sandwich bread or maybe breading on a chicken nugget. They don't contain the same nutrient profile as actual grain that we saw in an earlier slide. The picture on this slide shows a label for ingredients that it was a product marketed as a multi-grain gluten-free bread. And you can see there's really not a lot of creditable grains here. The one right in the middle says brown rice flour, and that's really the only creditable grain in this whole bag of bread. I also wanted to point out potatoes aren't a grain for our school nutrition programs. There are other institutions that do point to potatoes as being high in starch, and so they count them in their grain component for those institutionalized meals. For school nutrition, potatoes and sweet potatoes are always categorized in the vegetable component for our meal pattern. And the last item on this slide is that food items can't have more than 1/4 ounce of non-creditable grains to be counted as a grain in your meal pattern. We did get clarification on a couple of grains last year. Hominy is usually served as a vegetable for us, but if you get it as dry form, you will know it as grits. And it's not something that you usually serve in your school menus or on your school menus, but it's something that you could try sometime. My husband is a fan of grits and with a lot of cheese in it. Then you have the corn masa, your corn flours and corn meals, and they are all used in tortillas and taco shells. And we are most excited that popcorn has changed from non-creditable to creditable. It does take 3 cups of popcorn to make 1 ounce of grain, but this would be a fabulous snack for your after-school snack programs. And all of these grains, these new creditable grains, are considered whole grains for us. Also, there was a USDA memo last year that allowed school nutrition programs to credit the new pastas that are made with the colorful vegetable flours. If there's enough cereal grain in the pasta, they do count as grain. They can also count toward the vegetable component if there's enough of the flour. There are some other considerations if you're going to count those type of pastas in your meal pattern, such as staff training, and you have to have certain signage for the students to know what's in their pasta. For all of those rules, you'll want to get a copy of the USDA memo SP 26-2019. We did send that out when it was made available last year, but if you need another copy, let us know and we'll send one on to you. So now let's look at how you count your grains for a reimbursable meal. If you are making something from scratch, you'll have to calculate the ounce equivalents of grains based on the ingredients in your recipe. And you can do that either by hand, and remember that a cup of flour doesn't always weigh the same, and a cup of popcorn isn't the same as 1 cup of flour. Or you can use the handy dandy little workbook in the food buying guide, that recipe analysis workbook that we went through in December. If you need a refresher on using raw, there are video tutorials right on that food buying guide under the help tab. If you are buying in commercially prepared products like lasagna or breaded chicken nuggets or corn dogs, you do have to get your child nutrition labels or a product formulation statement from the manufacturers. There's just absolutely no way you can know how much grain is in their recipe. So all commercially prepared items, even your grains, should have a manufacturer's child nutrition label or product formulation statement. That manufacturer knows the ingredient and the quantity of ingredients in each servings. We can try to guess in some instances, but it is best to reach out to your manufacturer to get their calculations for your menued meal pattern. We have one case in point that has been a problem for several of our schools. This label on the right-hand side is from a hamburger bun that you can see the serving size. It says 2 ounces or 57 grams. And by comparing this with the Exhibit A chart that we're going to work on in a little bit, you would think that this would credit 2 ounces of grain to your menu. However, the manufacturer knows that from this ingredient list, they only have 30.73 grams of creditable grains in this product, in each serving of this product. And we said back in earlier slide that each baked good had to have 16 grams per ounce of creditable grains. So if we divide this 30 by 73, here we go, 30.73 grams by 16 grams per ounce of grain equivalents. And I know, I'm sorry, math again, it equals out to 1.92 ounce equivalents of grains. And of course, we have to round down, and it gets down to that 1.75 ounce equivalents. So we have that right here. The manufacturer has given us a product formulation statement for this item. And if we go out and look for this product formulation statement during your administrative review, and you're calculating 2 ounces, and we find that it's only 1.75 ounces, that will be a finding in your review. So please check it out if you check out from your manufacturers for their product formulation statements. So if you are bringing in certain items, though, we do know that it's tough to get those product formulation statements. You've asked your food distributor for them. You've emailed the manufacturer for one, and nobody's getting one back to you. You can do a rough calculation to get it started on your menu. And the easiest way is to go to the food buying guide. They have given us some new updated tools in the food buying guide. We've got the Exhibit A Greens tool. My Products is actually where your documentation will be stored, and then the Enter the Product is where the calculation will be done. And then the last two are the newest two tools that are available on this food buying guide. These are flow charts for determining if your grain is creditable, and that would be the left side flow chart. The right side is a flow chart to determine if your product meets the whole grain rich criteria. Both of these are interactive, which means when you click on that drop-down menu, when you click on either one of these, this first question on either one of them will pop up, and you'll have to answer yes or no. So for the determining creditable grains, is that food product labeled as whole grain? If you got a label that says it's whole grain, of course it's going to be creditable to our program. If you say no, it's going to pop up the next question. And if you say no to each one of these questions, it'll just keep popping these questions up until you get to the very last one. If you answer no to that one, your food item is not going to be creditable. If you answer yes, you're done. And any place along this line of questions, if you answer yes, then your food product is either creditable or whole grain rich. Really nice little tool rather than taking the paper flow charts and going down the levels. I am just impressed with the USDA staff, as they're doing a great job of updating and making the food buying guide more interactive and user-friendly for school kitchens. And we just can't wait to see what they're going to come up with next for the food buying guide. Now let's get back to this Exhibit A Grains tool. We did talk a little bit about this when we did the recipe analysis workbook. The Exhibit A Grains tool is included in that. If you're doing a grain all by itself, though, you can use this by clicking on the Enter Product. You're going to search for your product and then add it into the work area. Once you get it into the work area, you add in your serving size, and it spits out a nice little grain contribution calculation for you, and you can store this right on the food buying guide. The Exhibit A tool is available as a paper copy for you, though, and I emailed you the paper copy, or it is on page 24 or 25 of your lunch production book. It is 2 pages, so I hope you have 2 pages in front of you. This tool can be used if your product does not contain more than 1 non-creditable grain. So if you got 2 or 3 or even 4 non-creditable grains, like that gluten-free multi-grain bread had in the one of those first slides, you can't use the Exhibit A tool for calculating your grains. If you've got 1 or none, then you can use this tool. So remember, for those non-creditable grains, you were looking for the individual starches and added fiber. So let's take a closer look at Exhibit A. You can see that they're grouped by serving size. So Group A, that includes some of your chow mein noodles, your small savory crackers and croutons. This group will have to have 22 grams or 0.8 of an ounce for a serving size to equal 1 ounce of equivalents. For Group B, and these includes pretty much all your breads, your buns, sweet crackers, and pizza crust, this group must have at least 28 grams or 1 ounce of weight in a serving size to make 1 ounce equivalents of grains. Group C then needs 1.2 ounces for a serving size, and these include cornbread and corn muffins. You can see that each group gets a little bit heavier as more ingredients get added to the recipe. Now make sure that you're matching the description with your actual product, as there are similar items in several different groups. If we look for pretzels in Group A, we've got hard pretzels. Those are the little tiny hard pretzels. And then in Group B, and this is an alphabetized list, so this is closer to the bottom, pretzels. These are the soft, larger, more bread-like pretzels. In Group C, we've got cookies. These are maybe your plain sugar cookies or wafer-like cookies. And then over in Group E, we have cookies that have nuts and fruit pieces and chocolate in them. Let's look at Group H and I. These are more of the specialized categories of grains. All of Group H are those cereals that get cooked with water. And so you want to menu them as a cooked volume. You have a half a cup cooked cereal that makes 1 ounce of grain. And then Group I is your ready to eat cereals. And these are broken down into 3 different categories, and you need to match the cereal that you are looking for grain equivalents for to determine your serving size, or serving size to determine the grain equivalents. So that's how you use Exhibit A. Let's take a closer look with a couple products. Now this is a blueberry muffin, and our first step in using Exhibit A is to look for any non-creditable grains in the ingredient list. We see that we have modified cornstarch in this blueberry muffin, but there's only one, so we can use the Exhibit A. And in the muffin category, we see muffins in Group B, but this is an English muffin, not what we're looking for. Group C is a corn muffin, and in the ingredient list, the only thing that was corn was that cornstarch, so it's not a corn muffin. And we finally find all of the other muffins in Group D. So we are going to categorize this muffin in Group D. And this muffin for Group D needs to have 55 grams or 2 ounce serving size. We saw that this blueberry muffin on the left side was a 2 ounce muffin if it's served as a half a muffin. And it's 57 grams. So it does make the weight for a 2 ounce muffin, and will equal 1 ounce of grain. Let's try another one. This is a sliced bread, and we need to check our ingredients again. And it does have a non-creditable grain in the wheat bran, but again, only one. So we can use the Exhibit A. We need to find it, and we do find bread in Group A, but of course these aren't what we're looking for. It's in Group B. where a serving size is 28 grams or 1 ounce serving size for the 1 ounce equivalent of grain. We're going to use that group B then. Then we need to find the serving size, and we see it's 1 slice in this loaf of bread, and 1 slice will equal 26 grams or 0.9 ounces. This doesn't quite make that 28
Rhonda?
grams. Yes.
It seems that your sound is not on. I don't know if, oh, I can hear you now.
Okay.
I'm not sure what happened, but if you could go back to the last slide and just,
okay. We'll
just
start
repeat.
here.
We heard you after, wheat bran, and then you started explaining the different groups where to find it.
Oh, really? So we need to go.
Nope, just in the slice of bread.
Okay, so it's a slice of bread, this one. So yes. We've got wheat bran, and yes. Then we need to find our product in Exhibit A, and we found that in Group B, the bread sliced. It's not our coating or bread sticks. It's the sliced bread we're looking for, which is 28 grams for a serving size. Now we're going to compare our sliced bread with our Group B serving size. We need to find our serving size then on the loaf. This is 1 slice is 26 grams or 9/10 of an ounce. Now we're going to do that dreaded math. Our bread slice is 26 grams and we need 28 grams. So we are going to divide that 26 grams by 28 grams. We get 0.92 ounce equivalents of grain. And of course, 0.92 ounces equivalents is not a quarter ounce. We needed to round it down to the nearest quarter ounce. This bread slice is only going to count in your menu for 3/4 of an ounce of grain. We talked about the meal pattern for our kindergarten through 8th grade needing 1 ounce daily. You would have to actually serve them 2 slices of bread to make that 1 ounce requirement daily. And for your 9th through 12th grade, they would need 3 slices of bread on their plate going by the cash register if bread was one of their components that they chose in offer versus serve. The moral of this story is to please check your bread labels. We've just found too many schools that are using these loaves of bread that don't quite make that 1 ounce of equivalence. And so here's another example that we found where the serving size was 2 slices or 52 grams. If you looked at that quickly, you're going to say, oh, that's heavy enough to make my 1 ounce equivalents, but it really isn't. You would have to divide that in half if you're only offering 1 slice of bread. Amy, I'm going to stop here and see if there are any questions about.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, we've got a great question. Asking about the grain requirements when there are short school weeks. So you mentioned there's the daily and then the weekly requirement. What do you do if you've got a short week?
Yes, and a short week then for 3 and 4 days. USDA actually has those calculated out for the National School Lunch Program. We do not have them up on our website yet, but they are coming. But you can basically do the math. 8 divided by 5 is whatever that is, and subtract that off each for a 4-day week, and for a 3-day week would be that 8 divided by 5 and subtract that amount off. So yes, a short week is a less amount of grain, and we do take that into consideration when we're doing the administrative reviews, but we will post those meal patterns on the website. Great question.
Yes, and that is the only question we have in the chat box at this time.
Wonderful. Okay, so that I hope you all understand how to use your Exhibit A grain tool now. I learned an awful lot when I was doing this presentation on using that tool, and I'm so glad the Food Buying Guide now has it available for us as well. Remember, get your product formulation statements if at all possible, though, so you don't have to do these calculations. Back to this bread label, then we're going to switch to whole grain rich. And this bread has one thing going for it. It is a whole grain rich bread. It's made with whole wheat flour, and you can tell that it has whole wheat as its first ingredient. So we are going to switch gears now and talk about whole grain. Why is whole grain good for us? Most people in North Dakota are really familiar with grains because we see acres of amber waves of wheat and barley each summer. Grain is anything that is a cultivated cereal crop where the seed is used as food. And this is the definition for us in school food service. The seed, or that grain, has three different parts. You can see there's an outer part that's called bran. This preserves the nutrient value inside. It also resists water for that little germinating seed inside until there's enough to pop it open. It also is undesirable to insects and microorganisms. So this is great for using whole grain, that our insects don't like it and the microorganisms don't grow when you have whole grain flours. That second part, the biggest part there, is called the endosperm, and it accounts for about 82% of the kernel's weight. That's where all the energy for that little germinating seed comes from. There's also protein in the endosperm, and it's our primary source of food, but it can also be used to make fuel, to make sweeteners, bioplastics, all kinds of other products that are made from the endosperms of our cereal grains. Finally, there's the little germ, and this is the only living part of the seed. This germ contains that essential genetic information for it to grow into a plant. To get it growing, it needs enzymes and vitamins and minerals, and that's where those are all stored, in the germ. Now, a percentage of the germ also has oil in it, and that's where the whole grain flours have the problem, is that they can spoil faster because they have that little bit of oil in them. When the cereal crop is sent to the manufacturer to be milled into flour, the finished product must have the same relative proportion of seed parts, the bran, the endosperm, and the germ, as the original to be considered whole grain. So the miller can't take all the bran off and all the germ off and call it whole grain, and put a little bit back and call it whole grain either. It's got to be in the same proportion as what the seed originally has. And now is the time, if you've got any popcorn left, we need to look at that popcorn. If you have any old maids in the bottom of your bowl, you can see the bran or the pericarp on that seed kernel. You can also find some bran in the kernels that are popped. There'll be the little brown bits hanging on to the inside of the white fluffy parts, or they may be in the bottom of your bowl. The germ is really hard to find once the popcorn is popped, but you could cut one of these old maids open and you would find the little germ hiding at the base of this kernel. And finally, the big white part is the endosperm of your popcorn. I think popcorn is so much fun. Why do we want whole grain rich foods in our diet? Well, we showed that data on the whole wheat flour at the beginning slide, all the different nutrients that were available, including carbohydrates, protein, and even some fats, and then a whole bunch of vitamins and minerals. You can see that there is a huge loss from milling, from making all-purpose flour that's not a whole grain. This graph compares the amount of each nutrient available in all-purpose bleached wheat flour by the amount available in the whole grain 100% wheat flour. The 100% whole wheat flour is this purple line. Anything that's below the line shows that those nutrients have been lost in the milling or the making of flour. Now, these nutrients that are above this purple line, they may have been lost. There may have been significant losses during milling, but they've been added back in what is called the enrichment of that flour. And they have been enriched to help us prevent some of the diseases that we get if we don't have enough of each one of these vitamins. So enrichment is also different from fortification, as enrichment adds to the nutrients that are already available in that flour, where fortification is adding new nutrients such as calcium and zinc and vitamin A and D and C. And you'll see fortification in our cereal boxes. We mentioned that it's whole grain rich products that our meal patterns are looking for. And what does USDA mean by whole grain rich? Basically, the product must contain at least 50% of its ingredients as whole grain. A product that is 100% whole grain, such as 100% whole wheat bread, is whole grain rich. However, students, they're not accustomed to that coarser texture or the slightly bitter taste of 100% whole grain items. So USDA has allowed us to blend with the refined but enriched grains to produce the more familiar taste for our students. An item must contain 50% or more whole grains to count as whole grain rich, and the rest of the grains must be enriched. There's no requirement to serve whole grains in the summer food service or emergency summer food service programs. But just like the need to keep students encouraged to take a half a cup of fruit or vegetable at this time, it's also wise to continue to offer whole grain items that they're accustomed to, like your whole grain pizza crust and your breads and some of the cereals. School year 2019 did bring about the flexibility for our national school lunch program and after school snack and breakfast as well, by giving us the flexibility of using at least 1/2 of the grains served weekly as whole grain rich, and the other portion of those grains served only needed to be enriched grains. I hate to say this, but at this time, that flexibility has been thrown out with a lawsuit last May, and we haven't heard if we can proceed with the flexibility for next year yet. We're hoping to hear very soon, and we will let you know as soon as we can. But I just have to prepare you now that you should be preparing if you need to go back to 100% whole rich, but we hope to hear very soon on that. Now, to figure out if a product is whole grain, there's a couple things you can do. First, and the easiest, is to look at the ingredient list, look at the label, and see if the first ingredient has the word whole. If the first ingredient is water, then the second ingredient must have the word whole in front of it. If it's a mixed food, then your primary grain ingredient has to be whole grain. It has to be listed first in the grain portion of that mixed food, such as a chicken patty will have the chicken listed first, and then your grains for the breading second. A second way to know if it's whole grain rich is that an FDA whole grain health claim will be on the label somewhere. That health claim must say diets rich in whole grain foods and other plant foods and low in total fat, saturated fat, and cholesterol may reduce the risk of heart disease and certain cancers. This is not common on your labels, but if you do find that on one of your grain products, it will tell you that that grain product is whole grain rich. When you get your child nutrition labels or product formulation statements, those will also indicate if the grain item is whole grain rich or not. And then finally, remember that you can use that decision tool for whole grain rich items, that interactive tool on the food buying guide. All good ways to find out if your product is whole grain rich. But the first one is look at the first ingredient on your label. Now, if we were meeting in person, this is where we would spread out all kinds of labels onto the table and let you find whole grain rich labels and ones that are not. But since I don't have that luxury, we'll just look at these labels online here. And I will point to oatmeal. And oatmeal, this one does say whole grain rolled oats. But anytime you have oatmeal, whether it's instant or steel cut or rolled or old fashioned, those are all whole grains. So oatmeal is always whole grain. The next two, this one's an organic whole wheat flour and a stone ground whole wheat flour. Because these two labels have whole in their description for the wheat flour, they are definitely whole grain rich. And they are first in line in their ingredients. Don't let the organic and the stone ground make you believe that these are whole grain. No. Organic or stone ground can take out some of the bran or some of the endosperm or some of the germ from those flours. So organic and stone ground doesn't always mean that it is whole grain rich. And then we've got down here a label for whole grain brown rice, and whole grain, just as the oatmeal, is kind of redundant because brown rice is always whole grain. And the last one we have is that the whole wheat flour is listed first, and then we've got a mix with unbleached wheat flour. And so this one is obviously not 100% whole grain, but it is whole grain rich. You can also make the determination on your recipes. This is a recipe for 51% white whole wheat bread, and that's all we're looking for is more than 50% whole grain. And here in the recipe, they've used 3 pounds, 12 ounces of the white whole wheat flour and 3 pounds, 8 ounces of the all-purpose flour. And I think they did that for ease of measuring each of the flours. Hopefully you've experimented with some of your favorite recipes to get them to be whole grain rich. And now the labels that are not whole grain rich. This first yellow label, it does have an enriched bleached wheat flour, but water and modified food starch are before it. So we're wondering if this is even a grain. It's got a lot of chemicals in its name. It's definitely not whole grain rich. This second one has corn, and to be a whole grain product, it needs to have whole corn, corn masa, cornmeal with it. It can't just say corn. And this is one that I would definitely contact the manufacturer to get a clarification on what kind of corn is in this product. If we get this label in an administrative review, we will not count it as whole grain rich. In rice, and if we see white, we know that it is not whole grain rich. Only the brown rice is whole grain. And then this one has enriched wheat flour as its first ingredient. This label is screaming whole grains on it twice in just a small amount of space, but it says honey wheat made with. So don't let made with or contains or 100% wheat slip you up. You have to look at the label, and we're looking for whole wheat flour as your first ingredient, and it may contain enriched wheat flour as the second or third. So I hope that that's clear of what you're looking for in whole grains. USDA has a really nice list. It is not inclusive, but it does describe a few more things for us. If you see wheat berries, rye berries, and oat groats on any of your labels, these are other names for the kernel, the cereal kernel. Wheat berries and oat groats are things that you do see every once in a while. Back under wheat, whole durum flour is something used in making pasta. If you see just durum flour, you know that that's not whole grain because there is whole durum flour. Semolina also is not a whole grain. Sprouted wheat will always be whole grain, as it takes that little germ to make the sprout for that wheat. We have brown rice and brown rice flour are always going to be whole grains, as well as wild rice. That'll be whole grains. We talked about corn, and then barley. You're looking for whole barley. There'll be a few schools that do use pearled barley in making soups or stews, and that is not a whole grain. And of course, I said this list was not all inclusive because they did not have popcorn, and popcorn is a whole grain. Well, we were hoping to bring you news about all the new grain products on the market right now for school use, but there are just too many out there to try and cover. It is an exciting time for school menus with new chips and crackers, and I've seen bread and pasta shapes that are new and new breaded entrees. If you have any questions on how to credit any of these new breads and grains, please give us a call. We'd love to help you make sure your menus are reimbursable. You can find more information on grains in your production books, of course, on the Institute of Child Nutrition on their website, theicn.org, and of course in the Food Buying Guide. And this is the website, Food Buying Guide, all one word, .fns.usda.gov. And I hope you have that one bookmarked in your computer. Now, we did talk about the food allergy right at the beginning to grains. So I did want to point out that SNA is hosting a webinar tomorrow on food allergies in school nutrition programs. If you watch this presentation on grains later, this webinar would be recorded and available on the SNA website. And if you're a member of SNA, these trainings are free. And if you're not a member, they do cost $49 to participate. So it would be more cost effective to become a member. I just have one slide left, Amy, and just to promote next April, our next kitchen counter conversations, we're going to talk about Every Kid Healthy Week and talk about our local wellness policies and assessments. So that I hope you all know how to credit your grains and what a whole grain rich product is. If you have any questions, let me know.
Thank you so much, Rhonda. That was very informative. And I do not have any questions in the chat, but if anyone has questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Otherwise, we do have about 8 minutes if anyone wants to unmute themselves or raise their hand. Did anyone else eat popcorn with me?
Daphne, you didn't eat popcorn?
Doritos. There we go.
Okay, that's good. Whole grain too. Did you look at the label? Is it whole corn? All right.
Awesome. And Joan says that she also had some popcorn and it was very good. So.
All right. I really appreciate you guys participating in these little sessions. We'd love to hear what you want to hear about. Anytime, give us suggestions.
All right. Yeah, if anyone has suggestions, go ahead and let us know. You can even put it in the chat now for future topics. Some comments on saying it was very helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. Yes. Good luck on summer meals. Well, if that's it, I think we can let everybody go so we can get out and enjoy the sunshine where you're at.
All right. Goodbye.
Thank you.